I came home unannounced, and I heard my daughter-in-law tell my disabled son that his fat mother disgusts her. 1 week later, I silently sold the mansion, valued at $4 million, and we disappeared, leaving only a note. She went crazy when she learned the truth. The wrought iron gate opened with a familiar squeak while my Mercedes glided down the cobblestone driveway. The mansion in the Gold Coast district of Chicago, with its elegant columns and meticulously manicured gardens, rose before me like a monument to decades of tireless work. My name is Rose, and I am 65 years old. I built this 3-story house with a neoclassical facade and a pool dollar by dollar with the sweat of my brow. I was not born with privileges. My parents were humble workers in Detroit. My father was a bricklayer and my mother was a seamstress. When I was left a widow at 38 with my son Robert, who was barely 8, I swore that we would never lack anything. I founded my own gourmet import business when few women dared to become entrepreneurs. I spent sleepless nights. I negotiated with international distributors when my business English was barely understandable, and I rejected several marriage proposals because I did not have time for distractions, as I used to joke with my friends. It was all for Robert, to ensure him a brilliant future, to build a legacy. The meeting with the New Horizons Foundation had been canceled at the last minute. The president was sick, so I returned home 2 hours earlier than planned, thinking about taking a bath and perhaps reading that Danielle Steele book that had been on my nightstand for weeks. I left my purse on the console in the foyer and took off the high heels that were killing me. The cold marble under my bare feet reminded me how much it had cost to renovate the floors last year, right before Robert's accident. My son, now 35, had been a brilliant engineer specializing in renewable energy. His promotion to project director at a multinational company had arrived just 2 years before the fateful day when a truck lost control on Interstate 90 and rammed his car, leaving him a paraplegic. The doctor said it was a miracle he survived, but his spinal cord was damaged at the T10 level. The diagnosis was devastating. He would never walk again. While I was heading toward the kitchen to make myself some tea, I heard voices coming from the living room. It was Alice, my daughter-in-law, unmistakable, but with a tone I had never heard her use. Hard, disdainful, almost cruel. "I do not know how much longer I am going to stand this charade," she said. "Your fat mother disgusts me, and so do you, useless cripple. If it were not for the plan, I would have already disappeared from this madhouse." I stood paralyzed, with my heart beating so fast I feared they could hear it. Slowly I approached the ajar door of the living room and looked through the crack. Alice, 30 years old, was standing in front of Robert, who remained in his wheelchair with his head down. She was wearing a tailored Chanel suit with sky-high heels that clicked on the floor as she walked in circles around my son like a predator stalking its prey. "Do you know what it is like to go to bed every night knowing that next to me I have a man who cannot even satisfy me?" she continued with poison in her voice. "Do you know how pathetic it is to see how you look at me believing that this baby is yours?" I brought my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. A baby! Alice had announced her pregnancy 3 months ago, assuring us she had conceived right before Robert's accident. We all celebrated the news like a ray of hope in our darkness. Robert raised his head with eyes full of tears, but also with a dignity that broke my soul. "I know," Alice replied with a calm voice. "I have known for a long time." Alice stopped dead in her tracks, visibly surprised. "What exactly do you know?" she asked, suddenly cautious. "That the baby is not mine, that you and Rick have been deceiving me for months, that you are planning to keep everything." Rick, 28 years old. He was the personal assistant we hired to help Robert when Alice had to go back to work at Chanel. Tall, athletic, and with a perpetual smile. He had been personally recommended by Alice as extremely competent and discreet. Now I understood why. A sharp laugh escaped Alice's lips. "And why haven't you said anything? Why continue with this comedy?" Robert looked out the window before answering. "For my mother. She trusts you. She loves you like a daughter. It would break her heart to know the truth." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. My son, my Robert, had been enduring this humiliation in silence to protect me. "Your mother is a naive old woman," Alice spat out. Do you think I do not know how she looks at me lately? She suspects something, but she is too cowardly to confront me. Before Robert could answer, the doorbell rang. Alice looked at her watch. It must be Rick. This conversation is not over. I quickly hid behind a column while Alice left the living room. When she passed by me, I could see she was wiping away tears of rage. I waited until I heard her footsteps moving away toward the entrance before entering the living room. Robert was still where she had left him, looking out the window with an expression that mixed pain and determination. I approached silently and put my hand on his shoulder. He jumped. "Mom!" His eyes opened with surprise and then with horror. "How long have you been there?" "What did you hear?" "Enough, son," I replied with a broken voice. "Enough." Alice had entered our lives like a whirlwind of elegance and ambition 5 years ago. Tall, with shiny black hair and eyes that changed color depending on the light. She worked as an event coordinator for Chanel. And her exquisite taste only competed with her ability to network with the Chicago elite. When Robert met her at a charity gala for renewable energy, he was completely captivated. I also fell for her charm. She was smart, cultured, and seemed to adore my son. She called me Mom Rose with a soft accent, a mix of Southern charm and city sophistication that always melted my heart. Their wedding 2 years later was the social event of the season. I paid every dollar with pride, happy to see my son so radiant. Alice wore a designer dress that cost more than my first apartment, but I did not care. She deserves the best, I thought then. My Robert has chosen well. During the first 3 years, everything seemed perfect. Alice supported Robert's career. She bragged about his achievements at social dinners and even talked about leaving her work when they decided to have children. She took us to trendy restaurants, introduced us to her influential contacts, and always had a little detail for me. A silk scarf, a French perfume, a book signed by the author. When the accident happened, Alice seemed to transform into a guardian angel. She took a leave of absence from work. She accompanied Robert to rehab, investigated experimental treatments, and consoled us both when tears overcame our strength. "We will get through this together as a family," she repeated while holding our hands in the darkest moments. I clearly remember the day Robert returned home from the hospital 3 weeks after the accident. Alice had transformed the study on the ground floor into an adapted bedroom with an adjustable bed railings and enough space to maneuver the wheelchair. "Do you like it?" she asked, nervous. "I have thought of everything. The nurse helped me choose the equipment." Robert looked around, his face an impenetrable mask. "It is fine," he replied with a flat voice. "Thank you." That night, while I was preparing a light dinner in the kitchen, I heard Alice crying in the bathroom. When she came out, she had red eyes, but she was smiling. "It is just exhaustion, Mom Rose, do not worry." During the first weeks, our routine revolved completely around Robert. Medical visits, rehab exercises, learning to handle the chair, and adapting the house. Alice remained the dedicated wife, reading engineering articles to him, telling him anecdotes from work, to distract him preparing his favorite dishes. But as months passed, something began to change in her. First, it was small details. She arrived a little later from work. She spent more time on her phone. She showed impatience when Robert had a difficult day. One night, approximately 6 months after the accident, I heard her talking on the phone on the balcony. Her voice had a tone I had not heard in a long time. Cheerful, flirty, slightly nervous. "I cannot talk much." "Yes, I miss you too. I will see you tomorrow." When she came in and saw me in the hallway, she quickly put away the phone. "It was Claudia from work," she explained without me asking. "We are organizing a charity event." I nodded, not knowing what to think. Claudia was her co-worker, an exuberant woman divorced twice who, according to Alice, knew half of Chicago. It was then that we decided to hire Rick. Alice had returned to work full-time, and I was busy with my import company, although I worked mainly from home. We needed specialized help for Robert. Alice appeared one day with 3 resumes. "This is the best," she said, pointing to Rick's. "He has experience with spinal cord injury patients, he knows how to drive, and is available to stay overnight if necessary." When I met Rick, I understood why Alice had pre-selected him. He was attractive, with impeccable manners, and spoke with a serene security that was comforting. Robert and he connected immediately, talking about football and cars. "I like him," Robert said after the interview. It seems he knows what he's doing, and he does not look at me with pity. Rick turned out to be everything we expected and more. Not only did he help Robert with his basic needs, but he encouraged him to resume abandoned interests. He got him to read engineering magazines again. He installed software so he could design projects from the computer, and even convinced him to start doing arm-strengthening exercises. 9 months after the accident, Alice gave us news that lit up our lives like a ray of hope. "I am pregnant," she announced during dinner with tears in her eyes. "We are going to be parents." Robert froze with his fork halfway between the plate and his mouth. "How—" he began to ask, but interrupted himself. "Before the accident." "My love," Alice clarified quickly. "Remember, I stopped the pills in February. The doctor says I am almost 3 months along." My son's face transformed. Surprise gave way to a joy I had not seen since the accident. He approached Alice and hugged her tightly, burying his face in her flat belly. "A baby." "We are going to have the baby," he repeated through tears. I also cried, moved by the scene and by the hope I saw reborn in Robert's eyes. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Alice sitting in the dark looking out the window. "Can't you sleep, daughter?" I asked, turning on the dimmest light. She jumped slightly. "I was just thinking," she replied with a weak smile. "Everything is changing so fast." The next day I took the emerald earrings my late husband Edward gave me for our 10th anniversary out of the safe. I wrapped them in tissue paper, put them in a velvet box, and gave them to Alice. "I want you to have them," I told her, "so you can wear them the day my grandchild is born." Alice looked at them dazzled. "I cannot accept them. They are a family heirloom. Now you are my family, and I want my grandchild to have a mother who shines as much on the inside as on the outside." She hugged me tightly, and I noticed she was trembling slightly. "Thank you for treating me like a daughter," she whispered. "I do not know what I would do without you." That same day I sold an apartment I had downtown as an investment. With the money, I opened an account for my future grandchild and gave Alice $200,000. "To better adapt the house for the baby, and so you can reduce your working hours when he is born," I explained. Her eyes opened wide. "It is too much, Rose. I cannot. I insist. I want you to focus on being happy and taking care of my grandchild." Life seemed to take a new course with the news of the pregnancy. Robert began to take an interest in adapting the house for the baby. He researched strollers compatible with his wheelchair, and he even contacted former colleagues to explore the possibility of working from home. Rick became an even more constant presence in our lives. Alice insisted that he should stay overnight 3 times a week so I could rest well during the pregnancy. We set up a room for him on the ground floor next to Robert's adapted bedroom. Doubt once planted grows like weeds, feeding on small details, furtive glances, half-spoken words, uncomfortable silences. And soon what seemed like isolated coincidences began to form a pattern impossible to ignore. The neighbor Carol, a retired widow who lived in the house next door and with whom I shared coffee on Wednesdays, was the first to sow the seed. "Rose, I do not want to be nosy," she said, stirring her latte. "But do you know that boy who works for you well, Rick?" I looked up from my cup. "Of course. He has been with us for almost 6 months. He is totally trustworthy." Carol pressed her lips together, hesitating whether to continue. "It is just that the other day I saw them. Him and your daughter-in-law at the Milano Cafe. They seemed very close. Close, I repeated, feeling a knot in my stomach. They were holding hands across the table, and it did not look like a work conversation." Carol lowered her voice. "I thought you should know. Maybe it is just my imagination as a gossipy old woman, but—" "I appreciate the concern, Carol," I interrupted her, trying to maintain my composure, "but I am sure there is an explanation. Alice considers Rick almost like a brother. It is normal for them to be close." Carol nodded, but her skeptical look said otherwise. That night, I checked Alice's phone while she was showering. I felt terrible doing it, but anxiety consumed me. I found nothing suspicious in her messages, but I noticed she had a duplicate WhatsApp application, something that seemed strange to me. The following weeks, I became a silent observer, attentive to every detail. I noticed how Alice received messages at all hours, how she smiled at the phone and went out to the balcony to answer, how Rick and she seemed to have secret codes, complicit looks. One day while I was cleaning Rick's room, something I insisted on doing myself. Even though we had a cleaning service, I found a receipt from a hotel in Milwaukee from 3 weeks ago. It coincided with a weekend when Alice had supposedly gone to a fashion congress in another city. The finding left me paralyzed. There could be 1,000 innocent explanations, I told myself. Maybe Rick had taken advantage of his day off to visit Milwaukee. Maybe the receipt was old. Maybe. But when I lifted the mattress to change the sheets, I found something that pulverized all my justifications. A photograph of Alice and Rick hugging on a beach, smiling at the camera like two lovers. By Alice's slightly bulging belly, I calculated the photo was recent, probably from a month ago. I sat on the bed shaking. All the pieces fit now, the absences, the secret calls, the growing intimacy, the conversation I had overheard. But what tormented me most was a new suspicion even more terrible. What if the baby was not Robert's? I mentally reviewed the dates. Alice had announced her pregnancy 9 months after the accident. She claimed she had gotten pregnant just before when Robert still could. But what if it was a lie? What if the father was Rick Rage and pain clouded my vision? I wanted to confront them immediately, to unmask their deception in front of everyone. But something stopped me. Robert. My son, who had found in that baby a reason to keep going. Destroying that illusion could devastate him completely. I needed more proof, to be absolutely sure before acting. And above all, I needed a plan to protect Robert, both emotionally and financially. I put the photograph back where I had found it and left the room with a shrinking heart. That night during dinner, I observed Alice and Rick with new eyes. Every smile, every gesture, every word now seemed loaded with a sinister meaning. Robert, oblivious to everything, spoke enthusiastically about advances in robotic prosthetics he had read in a scientific journal. In 10 years, maybe less, paraplegia could be a thing of the past, he said with a shine of hope in his eyes. Imagine I could walk again, play with our son. Alice smiled mechanically, nodding at the right moments. But her eyes constantly wandered toward Rick, who ate in silence at one end of the table. That would be wonderful, honey, she finally replied, but I do not want you to get your hopes up too much. You know what the doctors say about realistic expectations. I saw how the light in Robert's eyes went out at the comment, and I felt a stab of pain. My son did not deserve this. He did not deserve a wife who cheated on him, who undermined his hope, who was possibly making him believe that another man's child was his. That same night, when everyone was sleeping, I searched my office for the property deeds of the house, the deeds to my companies, and all important papers. I gathered them and put them in my personal safe, changing the combination. I also transferred a significant sum from my main account to a secondary account that Alice did not know about. They were small acts of protection. I did not know exactly against what, but my maternal instinct drove me to shield what was mine, what belonged to Robert. The next day, while checking the mail, I found a letter from the bank addressed to Robert. I opened it, worried it was some urgent matter that he and his state might have forgotten. What I read left me frozen. It was a notification of a change of ownership in his accounts. Someone had added Alice as a co-holder with full powers on all of Robert's accounts, including his investment funds and his pension plan. Robert's signature was there, but it looked strange, shaky. Had my son signed this document consciously, or had they tricked him somehow? I decided to consult with Martin, the lawyer who had handled family matters for years. I called him pretending I wanted to update my will, but once in his office I told him all my suspicions. Mrs. Rose said, "Martin, after listening to me attentively, what you are telling me is very serious. If your suspicions are true, we would be talking about a possible case of financial manipulation, even forgery, if your son's signature was obtained with deceit. What do you recommend?" Martin said. "First, absolute discretion. Do not confront anyone yet. Second, we need to gather more evidence. And third, we must protect the family assets before it is too late." I left the office with a clear action plan. That same afternoon, I hired a private investigator, recommended by Martin, an ex-cop named David. I tasked him with watching Alice and Rick, documenting their meetings and investigating their pasts. I want to know everything, I told him. Where does Rick come from? How did he really meet Alice? If they have joint bank accounts? Everything. David nodded with professionalism. I will have a preliminary report in a week, Mrs. Rose. Meanwhile, act natural. Do not change your behavior or give reasons for suspicion. During the following days, I maintained a facade of normality that cost me superhuman effort. I smiled at Alice, chatted with Rick, and took care of Robert as always. But inside, my heart broke a little more every time I saw my son talk to Alice's belly, excited about a future I feared was a cruel lie. One afternoon, while Alice was at work and Rick had taken Robert to physical therapy, I decided to check my daughter-in-law's room more thoroughly. I knew I was invading her privacy, but my son's well-being was at stake. In the back of her closet, hidden between shoeboxes, I found a small security box. I tried to open it without success. I was about to give up when I remembered that Alice always used the same combination for everything, her birthday. The box opened. Inside I found several documents, including an ultrasound of the baby. The date matched what Alice had told us, but something caught my attention in the corner of the document, barely visible. There was a medical note about the estimated conception date. According to that calculation, the baby had been conceived 2 months after Robert's accident, when he was already in the hospital, incapable of having relations. I felt the ground open under my feet. My worst fear was confirmed. The baby was not Robert's. Alice was not only cheating on my son with Rick, but she was making him believe that child was his, giving him false hope, a reason to live based on a colossal lie. I also found another document that left me breathless, a draft agreement for the sale of the house with my forged signature. According to this document, I agreed to sell the mansion and split the money into 3 equal parts, for me, for Robert, and for Alice. But knowing the manipulation they were exercising over Robert, it was easy to imagine that the money would actually end up in 2 parts, neither of them for my son. I photographed all the documents with my phone and put everything back as it was. Then I locked myself in my room and cried as I had not done since my husband's death. I cried from rage, from helplessness, from pain for my son. But above all, I cried from disappointment. I had welcomed Alice like a daughter. I had opened the doors of my house and my heart to her. I had entrusted her with the most valuable thing I had, Robert's well-being, and she had betrayed us in the vilest way. When I heard Alice pronounce those cruel words about me and my son, something changed inside me, as if an invisible barrier had broken, releasing a force I did not know I possessed. I was no longer the indulgent mother who only swallowed pain in silence. I was a woman ready to fight tooth and nail to protect her son. After that revealing moment in the living room, when Robert and I recognized each other in our shared pain, we decided to act. We could not continue living under the same roof with people who despised us and planned to rob us. "Mom, we have to go." Robert told me that night when everyone was sleeping and we could talk in private. "I do not want to spend one more day near them." "I know, son, but we need a plan," I replied, squeezing his hand. "We cannot just leave without securing our future." The private investigator's report arrived 2 days later, confirming our worst suspicions. According to David, Alice and Rick had known each other for more than 3 years, long before he was hired to take care of Robert. In fact, everything pointed to Rick having falsified his resume and his references to get the job. He had no previous experience with spinal cord injury patients. He had been a waiter and occasional model. The most alarming thing was that they had both recently opened a joint bank account in the Cayman Islands, where they had deposited significant sums of money. The origin of that money was suspicious, and David suggested it could come from the sale of the jewelry I had given Alice, including my mother's emerald earrings. "There is also something else," Mrs. Rose added, David. "I have found evidence that they are actively looking for buyers for this house. They have contacted several luxury real estate agencies. The plan was clear. Take control of our assets, sell the house, and disappear with the money, probably abandoning Robert to his fate." With the help of Martin, we developed a meticulous counterplan. One, transfer legal ownership of the house and my companies to a foundation controlled by Robert and me. 2, empty the joint bank accounts and transfer the money to secure accounts in Switzerland. 3, find a new home accessible and safe far from Chicago. 4, prepare the exit without raising suspicions. 5, leave a letter revealing that we knew everything along with copies of the evidence. Everything had to be executed with military precision. Alice and Rick must not suspect anything until it was too late. In Martin's office, I signed dozens of documents. Some transferred the ownership of the house to the Hope Foundation, ironically created originally to help people with disabilities. Others gave me full legal power over Robert's finances with his notarized consent, and others blocked any attempt by Alice to claim part of our assets. With this, Mrs. Rose, the house and the companies are armored, Martin explained. Even if they try to sell them, they cannot. The forged documents you found have no legal validity against these. My next stop was the bank where I had my main accounts. There I met with the director, James, a discreet man who had been managing my finances for over 15 years. I need to transfer these funds to my account in Switzerland, I explained, handing him a note with the amounts and data, and I want to close these joint accounts. James raised his eyebrows, surprised. It is a considerable amount, Mrs. Rose. Are you sure? Completely. It is a strategic investment. He asked no more questions. That was one of the advantages of being a premier client with considerable wealth. Absolute discretion. Meanwhile, Isabel, a trusted real estate agent, found a perfect property in Santa Barbara. Ground floor completely adapted for wheelchairs near the ocean and with private security. The house was empty, and we could move in a week. Everything fit. Santa Barbara was far enough from Chicago to start over, but not so far that Robert could not maintain contact with his medical specialists if necessary. To avoid raising suspicions, Robert began to speak openly about looking for a house in Santa Barbara on medical recommendation. Dr. Evans thinks the sea air would benefit me, he explained to Rick during breakfast. We are thinking of spending a season there, right, Mom? Yes, maybe a couple of months, I replied, playing along. I have asked Isabel to look for something suitable. I saw how Rick contained his concern. A move, even a temporary one, was not in his plans. And Alice? He asked with feigned innocence. Will she be able to take so much time off work? She will stay in Chicago, Robert replied naturally. Her career is important and she can visit us on weekends. Rick nodded, visibly relieved, and sent a discreet message on his phone, undoubtedly informing Alice of the change of plans. That night, Alice announced she had to travel to New York for work for 3 days. It is an important fashion show, she explained while serving salad. I cannot cancel it. Of course not, honey, Robert replied with a naturalness that surprised me. Mom and I will be fine. Besides, Rick is here. It was our perfect opportunity. As soon as Alice left for New York the next day, we accelerated our preparations. I silently packed our luggage. Only the essentials. Clothes, medicines, some family memories, important documents. Everything else could be replaced. The morning we were to receive the keys to the house in Santa Barbara, I made a last visit to Alice and Rick's room. I was not looking for anything in particular, just wanted to say goodbye in my own way to this space that had harbored so much betrayal. In Alice's closet, between boxes of designer shoes bought with my money, I found something unexpected. A large envelope with the letterhead of a luxury real estate agency. Inside was a preliminary agreement for the sale of the house signed by Alice as owner, with a forged power of attorney with my signature. The closing date of the sale was in 2 weeks. I felt no surprise but a final confirmation. They were accelerating their plans, perhaps pressured by our sudden interest in Santa Barbara. I took the document as final proof and added it to our dossier. That afternoon, when Rick took Robert to his weekly medical appointment, which was actually a visit to the notary for the final procedures, I received a call from Alice. Mom rose. Her voice sounded strangely tense. Is it true you are thinking of moving to Santa Barbara? Just temporarily, daughter, I replied with feigned innocence. The doctor thinks the change of scenery would be good for Robert. Are you worried about something? No. It is just that I was surprised. With the baby on the way, so many changes. The baby will not be born for another 4 months, I reminded her. By then we would be back. Unless... Is there something I should know about the pregnancy? A revealing silence settled on the line. "No, everything is going perfectly," she finally replied. "I will be back tomorrow night. We will talk then." Too late, I thought as I hung up. Tomorrow night Robert and I would already be far away. That night, the last in our house, Robert and I dined alone on the terrace. The night was warm. The stars shone over Chicago, and a complicit silence enveloped us. The garden I had cared for with such love for decades stretched before us. The pool lights cast bluish shadows on the blooming rose bushes. "Are you sure about this?" Mom Robert finally asked. "It is leaving a whole life behind." I looked around at the manicured gardens, the illuminated pool, the expensive furniture that had witnessed so many family moments. "Memories come with us, son," I replied with serenity. "Material things can be replaced. Dignity and truth cannot." Robert nodded, with eyes shining with contained emotion. "Thank you for fighting with me. Always, son. Always." In the living room on the coffee table, we left an envelope with a handwritten letter, along with copies of all the evidence we had gathered. The letter, brief but forceful. It said, "Alice and Rick, we know everything. The deception, the lies, the plans to keep our house and our money. We know the baby is not Robert's. We know about the account in the Cayman Islands, the jewelry sold, the forged documents. We will not see you in court because we do not want to subject ourselves to that emotional wear. But know that the house no longer belongs to you, nor will it ever. All assets are legally protected. Do not try to find us. This story is over. Rose and Robert." As I sealed the envelope, I remembered all the times I had opened my heart and my home to Alice. The family dinners, the Christmas gifts, the shared confidences. She had treated me like a mother. She had called me Mom Rose with a sweetness that I now knew was calculated and false. The pain of that betrayal was like a knife twisting in my chest. "Do you think they will come looking for us?" Robert asked, interrupting my thoughts. "They will try," I replied. "But by then, we will be protected. Martin has been very clear. They have no legal right over us or our assets." That night, I barely slept. I mentally reviewed every detail of the plan, ensuring we had not forgotten anything important. My mind wandered through the memories of this house, the laughter, the tears, the moments of genuine happiness. It was painful to think we would leave so much behind, but more painful would be to stay in a place turned into a prison of lies. At 5 in the morning, before the sun began to illuminate Chicago, I finished packing the last belongings. Only the essentials. Documents, medicines, some family photographs, clothes. The rest, as I had told Robert, we could replace. The adapted car I had hired arrived punctually at 6. The driver, a discreet man recommended by Martin, loaded our suitcases while I helped Robert settle in comfortably. Closing the house door for the last time, I felt a mix of pain and liberation. It was like amputating a gangrenous limb. Painful but necessary to survive. As the car went through the iron gate, I looked back one last time. The mansion stood imposing against the sky that was beginning to lighten, beautiful and empty like an abandoned shell. I felt no nostalgia, but the certainty of doing the right thing. Robert took my hand and squeezed it tight. To Santa Barbara indicated the driver, to our new life. And while Chicago faded in the distance, I felt we were leaving behind not only a house, but all the pain, the betrayal, and the lies. Ahead awaited an uncertain but honest future. A future we would build together brick by brick, truth by truth, as we had always done. The trip to the airport and the private flight to the coast took almost 6 hours. We arrived mid-afternoon. The house Isabel had found for us was in a quiet neighborhood a few minutes from the beach. It was a modern single-story villa with large windows that let in sunlight and an access ramp perfect for Robert's wheelchair. Nothing like our mansion in Chicago, but it had something the other had lost. The feeling of home, of a safe haven. "What do you think?" I asked Robert as we toured the rooms. He looked around, observing the open spaces, the wide hallways, the adapted bathroom, and then smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but authentic. "It is perfect. Mom, we can start over here." That night we ordered takeout and dined in silence on the back terrace, listening to the distant sound of the ocean. The salty air had a purifying effect, as if it cleaned the remnants of toxicity that Chicago had left in us. "Do you think they are back home yet?" Robert asked suddenly. He knew exactly who he was referring to. "Probably. Alice said she would be back tonight. I would like to see their faces when reading the letter," he said, with a mix of bitterness and satisfaction. I smiled slightly. David installed a hidden security camera in the living room. "If you want, we can see it." Robert's eyes lit up with surprise. "Seriously? We can see what is happening there?" I nodded, taking out my tablet. "I just need to connect to the app." The image appeared on the screen, our old living room empty and silent under the dim light of dusk. For almost half an hour nothing happened, and we were about to leave it when we heard the sound of keys in the door. Alice entered first, dropping her travel bag on the sofa. "Robert Rose," she called. "I am home." No one answered. We saw her frown confused and then take out her phone. "Rick, where is everyone? Did you take Robert somewhere?" She listened for a moment and then her expression changed to worry. "What do you mean you do not know you are supposed to be here?" "Yes, of course I am sure. I just arrived and the house is empty." She hung up and began to tour the ground floor, calling us with increasing urgency. Finally, she returned to the living room, and that was when she saw the envelope on the coffee table. She opened it with trembling fingers and took out the letter. As she read, we saw her face go from confusion to shock and finally to fury. She crumpled the paper in her fist and screamed, a primal sound of rage that made me shudder even through the screen. Immediately, she dialed again. "Rick, they are gone. They know everything. They left a damn letter." "Yes, everything about the baby, about the accounts. Everything. I do not care how. Come here right now." During the next hour, we watched how Alice and Rick, who arrived shortly after, frantically searched the house, looking for anything of value we might have left. Rick even tried to force my safe, without success. "It is useless," Alice finally shouted, collapsing on the sofa. "They took everything, the documents, the jewelry." "Calm down," said Rick, sitting next to her. "We still have the house. We can sell it and—" "You have not read the letter," she snapped. "They have legally protected the house. We cannot sell it." Rick turned pale. "But we have a buyer waiting. We promised them." "I know." Alice brought her hands to her face. "My God, what are we going to do now?" I turned off the tablet. I had seen enough. Satisfied, I asked Robert. He nodded slowly. I did not think I would feel this way, but yes, it is as if I could finally breathe. That night, for the first time in months, we both slept without nightmares. The next morning, while we were having breakfast on the terrace with the California sun caressing our faces, I received a call from Martin, our lawyer. "Mrs. Rose, I have important news." His voice sounded tense. "The police just arrested Rick." I was left breathless. "Why? What happened?" It turns out our investigator was not the only one who discovered his dark past. The police had been after him for months for a similar scam in New York. Apparently he is a serial con artist who specializes in vulnerable women and their families. "And Alice," I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Here comes the most surprising thing according to the police. Alice could be another victim. They have evidence that Rick manipulated her from the beginning, making her believe the plan was beneficial for both, when in reality he planned to disappear with all the money, leaving her as the sole culprit." The news left me stunned. Alice a victim, after everything she had said, how she had treated Robert. But I heard her with my own ears, Martin. The horrible things she said to my son. I am not saying she is innocent, Mrs. Rose, only that the story could be more complicated than we thought. The police want to talk to you, but I have explained that you need time. Do you agree to wait a few days? When I hung up, Robert was looking at me expectantly. "What is it?" "You have gone pale." I told him everything Martin had told me. His reaction surprised me. "I always knew there was something strange about Rick," he said thoughtfully. "He was too perfect, too attentive. But Alice, I do not know, Mom." Sometimes I caught her looking at me with something resembling guilt, as if she wanted to tell me something but could not. "Are you suggesting we should give her the benefit of the doubt?" I asked, incredulous. "After everything she has done, Robert shook his head. No, I cannot forgive her, regardless of whether Rick manipulated her or not. She lied about the baby. She made me believe it was mine. That is unforgivable. I nodded, relieved that my son was not thinking about impossible reconciliations. The police want to talk to us, but we do not have to do it now. Martin has bought us time. Good, said Robert, because before facing the past, I want to start building our future here. And so we began our new life in Santa Barbara, day by day, step by step. We established routines, getting to know the neighborhood, adapting to a quieter pace of life, but also more authentic. We found an excellent physical therapist for Robert, a few minutes from home, Dr. Anthony, a middle-aged man with skilled hands and a kind smile, quickly became an important ally. Your son has a lot of potential to regain independence, he told me after the first session. He is strong and, most importantly, he has will. Many patients give up. He does not. Robert began to take an interest in resuming his profession, although in a different way. He contacted former colleagues, explained his situation, and soon got some consulting projects he could do from home. It is not the same as directing teams on the ground, he confessed one afternoon. But I am still an engineer. My brain works perfectly. I, for my part, was in no hurry to return to the business world. My gourmet imports were still running under the direction of my trusted manager, and the accounts in Switzerland provided us with more than enough to live comfortably for the first time in decades. I allowed myself to simply live. Walk on the beach at dawn, read books on the terrace, cook elaborate dishes that I had never had time to prepare. It was during one of those morning walks that I met Helen, a retired pediatrician who walked her dog every morning, a honey-colored Labrador named Luke. After crossing paths several days in a row, we began to walk together. My husband died 5 years ago, Helen told me during one of those walks. Cancer. Since then, Luke and I keep each other company. I am sorry, I said sincerely. I was left a widow very young with a small child. It is hard, but you learn to move on. Exactly, smiled Helen. And Santa Barbara is a good place to heal. The ocean has that effect. Little by little, Helen became my first friend in the city. She introduced me to her group of friends, ex-professionals like her, who met weekly to play cards, attend concerts, or simply share a good meal. Normal people without pretensions who did not judge and knew how to listen. 1 month after our arrival, while we were having dinner in a small restaurant near the harbor, I told Helen the real reason for our move. I do not know why I felt capable of opening up to her, perhaps because her wise and compassionate look invited confidence. What a terrible story, she said when I finished speaking. It must have been devastating for both of you. It was, I admitted. There are days when I still wake up thinking it was all a nightmare, that Alice is still the loving daughter-in-law I thought she was. Helen took my hand across the table. Betrayal always hurts more when it comes from someone to whom we have opened our heart. But you survived, Rose. And most importantly, you helped your son survive too. Her words, simple but profound, moved me. She was right. We had survived, and that in itself was a triumph. 3 months after our arrival in Santa Barbara, life had acquired a pleasant rhythm. Robert worked from home 4 hours a day. I had resumed some responsibilities in my company, although always remotely, and we both had built small routines that filled our days with purpose. Every afternoon, if the weather allowed, we went out to the terrace to drink coffee and contemplate the ocean. Those quiet moments had become our tradition, a space to share the small triumphs and challenges of the day. Mom said, Robert, one of those afternoons, I think we should talk to the police. It has been 3 months. We cannot keep postponing the inevitable. I sighed, knowing he was right. Martin had informed us regularly about the case. Rick was still detained, accused of multiple scams, and Alice had been interrogated several times, although she was not under arrest. I know. I will call Martin tomorrow to arrange it, but Destiny had other plans. That same night, while we were watching a movie in the living room, the doorbell rang. It was almost 9, an unusual hour for visits. Are you expecting someone? Asked Robert. I shook my head, feeling an inexplicable apprehension. I got up and looked through the peephole. There, illuminated by the dim light of the porch, was Alice. My heart skipped a beat. She looked different. Thinner, with her hair in a simple ponytail, without makeup, dressed in jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Nothing like the elegant and sophisticated woman I knew. Who is it? Asked Robert from the living room. I could not answer. My throat had closed shut. The doorbell rang again, insistent. Finally, I found my voice. "It is Alice." Robert froze for an instant, then his face hardened. "Do not open it. Robert, I know you are there." Alice's voice came muffled through the door. "Please, I just need 5 minutes. Then I will leave, I promise." I looked at my son, undecided. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to pretend she did not exist. But another part, the one that still remembered the woman I had loved like a daughter, felt curious. 5 minutes, said Robert finally. Not one more. I opened the door, keeping my body as a barrier between Alice and the interior of the house. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. She lowered her gaze, visibly nervous. "Just to talk. Please, Rose. 5 minutes. Is that all I ask?" After a moment of doubt, I stepped aside to let her in. I led her to the living room where Robert was waiting in his wheelchair, his face a mask of self-control. "Hello, Robert," said Alice in a low voice. He did not answer, limiting himself to looking at her with a mix of pain and contained rage. "You have 5 minutes," I reminded her. "Sitting next to my son, the clock is ticking." Alice nodded, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "First, I want you to know that I am not here to ask for forgiveness. What I did, what we did, is unforgivable. I do not deserve your forgiveness, and I am not looking for it." She stopped as if she were choosing her words carefully. "I am here because I thought you should know the complete truth. Not to justify myself, but because you deserve to know everything." Then she told us her story. How she had met Rick 2 years earlier at a fashion party. How he had seduced her with promises of a life of luxury that she, raised in a humble family, had always longed for. How even after her marriage to Robert, she had kept that relationship secret, convincing herself it was just a fling, something passing. "I loved you, Robert," she said with a broken voice. "In my twisted way, I really loved you. But Rick, he knew exactly what buttons to push. He knew I wanted more than I had. Always more." She told us how, after Robert's accident, Rick had seen the perfect opportunity. He had convinced her that Robert could no longer give her the life she deserved, that together they could take the family fortune and start over in some tropical paradise. The baby was not planned. She continued, unconsciously touching her already visibly bulging belly. "When I discovered I was pregnant, Rick saw the perfect opportunity. Making you believe it was yours would give us more time and less suspicion." Robert, who had remained silent, spoke at last. "Why? Why that cruelty? Do you know what I felt when I believed I would have a son, that life was giving me something good after losing everything?" Alice closed her eyes as if she could not bear the pain in Robert's voice. "I have no excuse. I let myself be dragged by ambition, by the idea of an easy life. And when I tried to back out, when I saw how excited you were about the baby and felt I could not go on with this. Rick threatened me. He threatened you. I intervened, skeptical." She nodded. "He said he had proof that I had been an accomplice in previous scams, that I would end up in jail if I abandoned him. And I, like a coward, kept going." She told us how gradually she had realized that Rick never intended to share the money with her, how she had discovered too late that he planned to disappear with everything, leaving her to face the consequences. "The night you left, when we returned to the empty house and found your letter, Rick went crazy. He blamed me for everything. He said I had ruined his plans. That was the first time he hit me." She lifted the hair from her temple, showing a recent scar. 2 days later, the police came to arrest him. Apparently, they had been investigating him for months for similar scams across the country. They interrogated me for days. They thought I was his main accomplice. Her voice broke. And I was. In a way, not at the beginning, perhaps, but in the end, I knew exactly what we were doing. I chose to move forward. I chose to hurt the 2 people who had given me the most in life. The 5 minutes had long passed, but none of us seemed to remember. Alice's story, although it did not justify her actions, shed new light on what had happened. "What is going to happen now?" Robert asked. "Finally, with the police." "With the trial, Rick faces years in prison," she replied. "I have reached an agreement with the prosecutor. Full cooperation in exchange for a suspended sentence. Basically, probation and community service." She stood up slowly as if every movement cost her immense effort. "I have not come to ask you to forgive me nor to return to your lives. I just wanted you to know the whole truth and tell you face to face that I am sorry. I am deeply sorry." She headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. "Robert, there is something else you should know about the baby." He tensed his jaw, preparing for more pain. "What about it?" "It is a girl," said Alice with a small, sad smile, "and I have decided to give her up for adoption. To a good family who will love her without the shadows of my past. I think it is best for her." And with those words she left our lives as abruptly as she had entered them 5 years ago. We stood in silence for what seemed like an eternity. Finally Robert spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Do you believe her?" I reflected before answering. Did I believe in Alice's repentance? In her version of events, I do not know, I replied honestly. Part of me wants to believe her, wants to think that the woman we loved for years was not completely false. But another part remembers too well what she told you that day in the living room, the cruel things about you, about me. Robert nodded, understanding my dilemma because he felt it himself. "I suppose we will never know the whole truth," he said finally. "And maybe it does not matter anymore. We are here. We are safe. We are rebuilding our lives. The past should stay in the past." That night, while trying to fall asleep, I could not stop thinking about Alice, the ambitious and brilliant young woman I had met, the apparently devoted wife she had been, the calculating scammer she had become, and finally the defeated and regretful woman who had visited us. Which of those Alices was the real one? Perhaps all of them. Maybe people are not good or bad, but a complex mix of lights and shadows, of right and wrong decisions, of moments of strength and moments of weakness. The only thing I knew for certain was that regardless of her reasons or her regret, Alice had caused irreparable damage. And although I could try to understand her, I could not. I must not allow her to return to our lives. With that firm resolution in my mind, I finally fell asleep. Winter arrived in Santa Barbara with cold winds and storms that lashed the coast. From our terrace, now covered and heated, thanks to the renovations we had made, Robert and I contemplated the rough sea while drinking hot chocolate. 2 months had passed since Alice's surprise visit. We had not heard from her again, although Martin informed us that the trial against Rick had begun, and that she was fulfilling her part of the agreement with the prosecutor. Little by little, the episode became a distant memory, a painful story, but one that no longer defined our present. One particularly cold morning, while returning from buying bread, I stopped in front of a small park near our house. Despite the inclement weather, there was a girl playing on the swings, pushed by an older woman I assumed was her grandmother. The scene brought back memories of when Robert was little, and we spent afternoons in the park after school. A stab of nostalgia went through me. My son would never have that experience of fatherhood he had desired so much. "Lucy, be careful," shouted the woman as the girl swung too high. "You are going to fall." But the little girl just laughed, ecstatic with the feeling of flying. Her crystal-clear laughter resonated in the cold air like bells. I continued on my way, but that image of simple happiness stayed with me all day. A week later, while shopping at the supermarket, I heard a muffled sob in the cereal aisle. Turning the corner, I saw the same girl from the park sitting on the floor, with tears rolling down her cheeks. There was no sign of her grandmother anywhere. "Are you okay, little one?" I asked. Crouching to her height, she shook her head, wiping her tears with the cuff of her red coat. "I cannot find my grandma," she replied with a trembling voice. "She was here, and then she was not." "Do not worry, we will find her," I assured her, offering my hand. "My name is Rose. You are Lucy, right?" Her eyes opened with surprise. "How do you know I saw you in the park the other day with your grandmother? You have a very pretty laugh." That seemed to calm her. She took my hand, and together we headed to the supermarket entrance, where we informed the security staff. Barely 10 minutes later, an older woman came running, visibly distressed. "Lucy, my God, I almost had a heart attack," she exclaimed, hugging the girl tightly. "How many times have I told you not to wander away from me?" "I am sorry," Grandma murmured Lucy. "I wanted to see the chocolate cereals." The woman looked at me then, noticing my presence for the first time. "Thank you for taking care of her," she said with sincere gratitude. "I am Margaret Evans." "Rose Hernandez," I replied, shaking her hand. "It was nothing. Actually, Lucy is a charming girl." "And mischievous," added Margaret with a tired smile. "She has too much energy for my old bones." Lucy, already recovered from her scare, tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, she saw me in the park. She says I have a pretty laugh." Margaret looked at me with renewed interest. "Do you live near the park?" I nodded. "On State Street, a few minutes' walk. Us too. What a coincidence. I do not know exactly how it happened. But that casual conversation in the supermarket turned into an invitation for coffee, which turned into regular visits, which eventually led Margaret and Lucy to become an important part of our lives. We discovered that Margaret was a widow like me, and that she was raising Lucy alone since her daughter, a young journalist, had died in a car accident 3 years ago. Lucy was then only 4 years old. "It was devastating," Margaret told us one afternoon, while Lucy drew quietly in a corner of the living room. "Sarah was my only daughter. Losing her was like having my heart ripped out. But I had to keep going for Lucy." Robert and she connected immediately. Both knew the pain of losing mobility, independence, he because of his paraplegia, she because of the arthritis that deformed her hands and made her movements difficult. Lucy, for her part, showed no discomfort or excessive curiosity about Robert's wheelchair. For her, it was simply the way he moved, as natural as her grandmother using a cane. One day, while Margaret rested on the terrace, Lucy approached Robert with one of her drawings. "I drew a boat," she announced, proud. "So you can sail the sea." Robert examined the drawing with exaggerated seriousness. "It is an excellent boat," he ruled, "but it is missing something." "What?" asked Lucy, worried. "A flag. Every good boat needs a flag." They spent the next hour designing the perfect flag for the paper boat. I watched them from the kitchen. With a mix of joy and nostalgia, Robert would have been a wonderful father. As the weeks passed, our house filled with Lucy's drawings. Boats, houses, trees, and figures that only made sense in her 7-year-old imagination decorated the refrigerator, the hallway walls, even Robert's makeshift office. One afternoon, while Lucy and Robert played chess, or rather Robert tried to teach her the basic moves Margaret made, an unexpected confession. "Lucy is sick," she said in a low voice, so the girl could not hear her. "She has leukemia." The news hit me like a punch in the stomach, but she seems so full of life, so healthy. Margaret nodded with teary eyes. "She is in remission now. The last treatment worked, thank God, but the doctors say the risk of relapse is high. I am so sorry," I said, taking her hand. "Is there anything we can do?" "You are already doing it," she replied with a sad smile. "Since we met you, Lucy is another girl, more cheerful, more interested in the world, especially with Robert. She adores him." I looked toward the living room where my son and Lucy laughed while a chess piece rolled on the floor. It was true. Robert was also another person since they had entered our lives. More animated, more present, more himself. That night, after Margaret and Lucy left, Robert made a proposal that would change our lives forever. "Mom, I have been thinking. What would you think if we created a foundation for children like Lucy with serious illnesses? We could offer treatments, support for families, even scholarships for medical research." I looked at him surprised. It was the first time in years I saw him so enthusiastic about a project. "It is a wonderful idea, son, but it would be a huge commitment." I know, he replied with determination, "but we have the resources, we have the time, and above all, we have the experience of knowing what it means for life to change from one day to another. We could make a difference." "Mom, have you thought of a name?" I asked, knowing already that I could not refuse that shine in his eyes. "The Lucy Foundation," he replied without hesitation. "If Margaret thinks it is okay." "Of course." And so from the most painful betrayal, the most beautiful project was born. As if the universe had decided to balance things, returning to us with interest what we had lost. While preparing dinner that night, I thought about the long and tortuous road that had brought us here, about Alice and her betrayal, about our desperate escape, about the pain we had left behind, and then I thought about Lucy, about her laughter that filled our house, about her courage in the face of an illness she did not fully understand, about the way she had returned the light to Robert's eyes. Perhaps that was life, a constant balance between losses and gains, between endings and beginnings. And as long as we had the courage to keep going, to open our hearts, even after they had been broken, there would always be hope. That night, for the first time since we left Chicago, I felt truly at home. Spring arrived in Santa Barbara with an explosion of colors, the city gardens filled with flowers, the cafe terraces populated again, and the ocean acquired that deep blue tone that reminded me so much of the Mediterranean. 6 months had passed since our arrival in this coastal city we now called home, and almost 2 since Robert had proposed the creation of the Lucy Foundation. What began as an idea born from the heart had become a solid project that consumed much of our time and energy, but filled us with a purpose we had lost in Chicago. "We have 5 more families on the waiting list," Robert informed me one morning while reviewing applications on his computer. "All children with leukemia like Lucy, all in need of financial support for experimental treatments." I sat across from him in his office, now converted into the nerve center of the foundation. The walls previously bare were covered with Lucy's drawings and photographs of the children we were already helping. "And do we have enough funds?" I asked, although I knew the answer. I had transferred a considerable sum from our accounts in Switzerland to start the foundation, and several local companies had responded positively to our donation requests. "For now, yes," Robert replied, "but we need to establish more stable funding sources. I have been thinking about organizing a charity event, something big that attracts businessmen from all over the country. It is an excellent idea." I nodded. "We could make it coincide with the film festival. When the city is full of visitors with money to spend on noble causes." Robert smiled, his eyes shining with an intensity that reminded me of the man he was before the accident. This project had returned the spark, the determination, the sense of purpose that Alice's betrayal had snatched away. That afternoon, Margaret and Lucy came to visit us as they did almost daily. The little girl had finished her last chemotherapy cycle 3 weeks ago, and the results were promising. Her energy had returned, along with some strands of hair that were beginning to cover her previously bald head. "Look what I drew for the foundation!" exclaimed Lucy, showing Robert a colorful drawing where childish figures holding hands surrounded what seemed to be a giant sun. "It is beautiful," said Robert, examining it with genuine admiration. "I think this should be our official logo." "What do you think, Mom?" "Absolutely," I agreed. "Nothing could better represent the spirit of the foundation." Margaret watched me from the kitchen where we were preparing tea and cookies. Her eyes, always insightful despite her age, noticed something in my expression. "You are worried," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "What is wrong, Rose?" I sighed. I could not hide anything from this woman who had become my closest confidant. "Martin, our lawyer, called this morning. The trial against Rick has ended. They have sentenced him to 10 years in prison for multiple scams." "And isn't that good news?" asked Margaret, confused. "That man deserves to be behind bars after what he did to you." "It is," I admitted. "But he also said that Alice has completed her suspended sentence and community service. She is free to rebuild her life, and you fear she will try to contact you again." I nodded slowly. "I do not know what to think, Margaret. Part of me wants to believe in her repentance, that she was really manipulated by Rick. But another part remembers too well her cruel words, the coldness with which she planned to destroy my son." Margaret covered my hand with hers, her fingers deformed by arthritis, but warm and comforting. "Forgiveness is not for the other person. Rose, it is for oneself. It does not mean you must allow that woman back into your lives. But perhaps it is time to let go of the grudge for your sake and Robert's." Her words resonated with me for days. Could I really forgive Alice? Should I? I had no clear answers. But every time I saw Robert working passionately on the foundation, laughing with Lucy, rediscovering his value and purpose, I wondered if everything, even the terrible pain we had suffered, had not been necessary to reach this point. The charity event Robert had proposed began to take shape. We rented the ballroom of a historic hotel in downtown Santa Barbara. We hired a prestigious catering service and sent invitations to entrepreneurs, celebrities, and philanthropists from all over California. The response was overwhelmingly positive. "It is amazing," I commented to Robert while reviewing the confirmation list. "Not even in Chicago with all our contacts would we have achieved such a response." "It is," Lucy said Robert with a smile. "Her story touches people's hearts. And yours too. Mom, the successful businesswoman who leaves everything to help sick children. It is the type of story that inspires people to open their wallets." I laughed, but I knew he was right. Our story, carefully edited to omit the most painful details about Alice, had become part of the narrative of the foundation. The version we shared was simple. After Robert's accident, we had decided to start over in Santa Barbara, where we met Lucy and discovered our new mission in life. The night of the event finally arrived. The hotel ballroom was a display of elegance, dim lights, fresh flowers, music from a string quartet floating in the air, Robert in a tailored suit that highlighted his broad shoulders and disguised the wheelchair. He looked a decade younger. Determination and purpose had erased the lines of bitterness that the accident and betrayal had etched on his face. I had chosen a simple but elegant navy blue dress, complemented only by a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. Nothing ostentatious. We wanted the focus to be on the foundation, not on us. "You look beautiful," said Helen, my retired pediatrician friend, seeing me radiant. "It is happiness," I replied, surprising myself with those words. I was happy, and I realized, despite everything, I was. The gala was a resounding success. Robert gave a moving speech about the purpose of the foundation, illustrated with photographs of Lucy and other children we were helping. Margaret shared her experience as the grandmother of a girl with leukemia. And I spoke briefly about our vision for the future, expanding the foundation's services to include psychological support for families, funding research on innovative treatments, and eventually building a specialized rehabilitation center. Donations exceeded our most optimistic expectations. By the end of the night, we had raised enough to help all the families on our waiting list and to start planning the construction of the rehab center. "We did it," Robert whispered, excited, as the last guest said goodbye. "The foundation has a future." I hugged him, feeling my heart overflowing with pride. My son had transformed his pain into purpose, his tragedy into hope for others. What more could a mother ask for? It was then, in that moment of perfect joy, that I saw her, on the other side of the room, almost hidden behind a column, observing silently. Alice. My body tensed instantly. She was wearing a simple cream-colored dress, her hair in an austere bun, nothing that reminded of the elegant and sophisticated woman she had been in Chicago. But it was her, without a doubt. Our eyes met for an instant. There was no challenge in her eyes, nor rage, only a deep sadness and perhaps regret. She bowed her head slightly, as in a silent greeting, and then headed for the exit. "Mom, are you okay?" Robert's voice brought me back to reality. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I am fine," I replied automatically, not knowing if I should tell him Alice had been there. "Just emotional about everything we have achieved." That night, while Robert slept, I could not fall asleep. The image of Alice watching us from the shadows repeated in my mind. What was she doing in Santa Barbara? How had she found out about the event? What was she looking for? The next morning, while having breakfast on the terrace, I decided to tell Robert. "Alice was at the gala last night," I said without preamble. "I saw her when almost everyone had left." Robert stood motionless with the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Are you sure?" "Completely." We looked directly at each other. "Did she approach? Did she say anything?" "No," I replied. We just looked at each other for a moment, and then she left. Robert put the cup on the table, thoughtful. "It is strange. Almost 9 months have passed since we left Chicago. Why appear now, and why not say anything? I had no answers, only questions and a restlessness I could not shake off. 2 days later, while checking the mail at the Foundation's temporary office, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check for a considerable amount made out to the Lucy Foundation and a handwritten note. "For the children. It is not an apology. I know there is no possible apology, just an attempt to put something good into the world to balance the evil I have caused. I will not bother you again. A. and Alice Navarro. The check was for $200,000, exactly the same amount I had given her for the baby that was never Robert's. I stared at the check for what seemed like an eternity, not knowing what to do. Should I accept this money? Tell Robert, destroy it. Finally, I called Margaret. If there was anyone who could help me see this situation clearly, it was her. We met in a quiet cafe near the harbor. I showed her the check and the note and waited for her reaction. She seems sincere, she said after reading the note several times. She does not ask for forgiveness. She does not seek redemption. She just wants to help. Do you think we should accept it? I asked. It is a lot of money. It could do a lot of good. But it comes from her. Margaret looked at me with that mix of compassion and wisdom I had come to value so much. Money in itself is neither good nor bad. Rose, it is what we do with it that matters. If you can use it to help children like Lucy. Wouldn't that be transforming something born of deception into something good? She was right, of course. And yet, I do not know if Robert can accept it, I confessed. For him, anything related to Alice remains painful. Then let him decide, suggested Margaret. Be honest with him. Show him the check, the note, and respect what he decides. Whatever his choice, it will be the right one for him. That night, I told Robert everything. His initial reaction was exactly what I expected. Tension, disbelief, rejection. I want nothing from her, he said firmly. Not her money, nor her half apologies, nothing. I understand, I replied calmly. We can tear up the check, forget this happened. Robert remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the note Alice had written. Finally, he sighed deeply. But it is not about us, is it? It is about the children. Lucy, the others. They do not have to suffer for my pride or my pain. His perspective surprised me. It was exactly what I had thought. But I did not expect him to reach the same conclusion. So do we accept the money, I asked. We accept it, confirmed Robert. But on one condition, that she understands this changes nothing between us. That it is not an open door to return to our lives. I will make it clear, I promised. The next day I sent a brief email to the address on the check, assuming it belonged to Alice. The money will be used for the foundation. Thank you for your contribution. This does not change our personal situation. We wish you the best in your new life, but our paths must remain separate. The reply came a few hours later, equally brief. Understood and respected. I will not contact you again. Take care. And just like that, a painful chapter of our lives was closed. Not with explicit forgiveness, not with a dramatic reconciliation, but with a tacit agreement to move on, each on their own path, trying to do the right thing with the cards life had dealt us. 1 year after our arrival in Santa Barbara, the Lucy Foundation had become a respected and recognized organization throughout the region. We had helped more than 30 families with sick children, funded 3 research projects on innovative treatments for childhood leukemia, and we were about to inaugurate a small rehabilitation center in a historic building we had restored near the harbor. Robert, now the official executive director of the foundation, had recovered not only his purpose, but also his self-esteem. The wheelchair no longer defined his identity. It was simply one aspect of his life, not his totality. He had returned to smiling, making plans, looking toward the future with hope instead of bitterness. I, for my part, had found a balance I never thought possible after Alice's betrayal. I divided my time between the foundation, my import company, which continued to run efficiently under my trusted manager, and an active social life that included Helen Margaret, and an ever-widening circle of genuine friends. Lucy, our inspiration and daily joy, remained in remission. Her hair had grown back, black and shiny like her grandmother's, and her energy seemed inexhaustible. She spent almost as much time at our house as at hers, drawing with Robert, baking cookies, with me filling our days with laughter and incessant questions about everything imaginable. One sunny afternoon in June, while we were all gathered on our terrace celebrating Lucy's 8th birthday, Robert called me aside. "Mom, there is something I want to tell you," he said with a serious expression that alarmed me instantly. "It is about the new experimental treatment for bone marrow." My heart skipped a beat. We had been funding a promising treatment at a hospital in San Francisco, but preliminary results had not been as encouraging as we hoped. "Has it failed?" I asked, preparing for bad news. To my surprise, Robert smiled broadly. "Quite the opposite. The latest results are exceptional. Dr. Carter says it is the most significant advance in the treatment of childhood leukemia. In the last decade, relief flooded me like a wave. That is wonderful. Robert, does it mean that Lucy—" "Yes," he nodded, with eyes shining with emotion. "Margaret gave her consent this morning. Lucy will be the first patient to receive the full treatment. If it works, her chances of relapse will decrease drastically." I looked toward where Lucy was blowing out the candles on her cake, surrounded by other children from the foundation. Her face illuminated by joy and childish hope that not even illness had managed to snatch away. "It is a miracle," I murmured, unable to hold back tears. "No," corrected Robert gently. "It is science, hard work, and a little faith, and it is possible thanks to you, Mom. Without your support, without your resources, without your courage to leave Chicago and start over, none of this would exist." I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. It was true that I had invested a considerable part of my fortune in the foundation, that I had worked tirelessly alongside Robert to make this dream come true. But what he did not seem to understand is that I had received much more than I had given. I had recovered my son. Not the bitter and defeated man Alice and Rick had left in Chicago, but the authentic, brilliant, compassionate, determined Robert, the man he had always been destined to be, and in the process, I had rediscovered myself. I was no longer just the successful businesswoman, the protective mother, the widow who had sacrificed her personal life for her son. I was a complete woman, with friends, purpose, joy. That night, after everyone had left and the house was silent, I went out to the terrace to contemplate the ocean. The full moon cast a silver path over the calm waters of the bay, and the city lights shone like fallen stars along the coast. I thought about the long road that had brought us here, about that terrible day when I heard Alice say those cruel words to my son, about the despair I felt discovering her plans, about the pain of abandoning the house I had built with so much effort. Would I have changed anything if I could go back? The answer surprised me with its clarity. No, I would not change anything, because that pain, that betrayal, that moment of absolute darkness had led us here to Lucy, to the foundation, to this fuller and more authentic version of ourselves. Margaret was right. Forgiveness was not for Alice, it was for me. And in that moment, under the starry sky of Santa Barbara, I felt I could finally forgive, not forget, not excuse, but release the grudge I had carried for so long. The next morning, while having breakfast with Robert, I received a call from Martin, our lawyer. "Mrs. Rose, I have important news." His voice sounded strangely formal. "It is about Alice Navarro." My body tensed instantly. "What is wrong with her?" "She has passed away." "Mrs. Rose, yesterday in a traffic accident in New York." The coffee cup almost fell from my hands. Despite everything that had happened, the news hit me with unexpected force. Are you sure?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Completely. They called me from the prosecutor's office because I appear as her contact lawyer for issues related to Rick's case. Apparently she was in a taxi that was hit by a truck. Instant death, according to the preliminary report." "I understand," I said, trying to process the information. "Thank you for notifying me." "Martin." When I hung up, Robert was looking at me with concern. "What happened?" "You are pale." I told him the news with as much delicacy as possible. His reaction was complex: surprise, confusion, and finally a sadness that surprised me. "It is strange," he said after a long silence. "After everything she did to us, I should feel I do not know indifference relief. But I only feel sadness. She was so young with a whole life ahead." "I feel the same," I admitted. "I think despite everything, a part of me still remembers the woman we met at the beginning, the one we thought she was." We remained silent for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. "Should we go to the funeral?" asked Robert finally. The question took me by surprise. It had not occurred to me. I do not know. Son, do you want to go? He reflected for a moment before answering. Yes, not for her really, but for us to close this chapter definitely. And so 3 days later, we found ourselves in a small cemetery on the outskirts of New York, observing from a certain distance, while a handful of people gathered around a simple coffin. We did not approach the main group. Our presence was not about sharing grief, but about finding our own closure among the attendees. I recognized some people from the fashion world in which Alice had moved. There were no relatives as far as I could see. I wondered who would organize all these things, who would take charge of her belongings, of the legal procedures. The idea of a life ending without anyone really caring seemed deeply sad to me. When the brief ceremony ended and people began to disperse, a middle-aged man dressed in a somber suit approached us. Mrs. Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez, he asked politely. I am Charles Vance, Miss Navarro's lawyer. We tensed instinctively, but his attitude was respectful, almost solemn. Alice left specific instructions for me to give you this in case of her death, he said, extending an envelope. I took it with trembling hands, not knowing what to expect. Thank you, I murmured. She knew this could happen, added the lawyer, almost like an explanation. Not because of the accident, of course, but she had been in treatment for terminal cancer for months. The doctors had given her less than a year. The revelation left me breathless. Alice had been dying all this time since before her visit to Santa Barbara. We did not know, said Robert. As surprised as I was, I am very sorry. Charles nodded with a slight, sad smile. She did not want you to know. She said she had already caused you enough pain. After the lawyer left, Robert and I stayed a moment by the freshly covered grave. I felt no need to say anything, to make any dramatic gesture, just to be there, recognizing that this person, for better or worse, had been a significant part of our lives. Back in the car, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and another smaller envelope. Rose and Robert, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I do not know if you came to the funeral out of curiosity to close a chapter, or simply because Charles found you to give you this letter. It does not matter. I'm grateful to have this last opportunity to communicate with you. First, I want you to know that the cancer diagnosis came shortly after you left Chicago. A cruel irony, perhaps, or a kind of poetic justice. While I planned to steal your life, mine was already counted. I did not use this information when I went to see you because I did not want your pity. I only wanted your understanding, perhaps, and the opportunity to explain myself one last time. In the attached envelope, you will find my will. I have left everything I have, which is not much, to the Lucy Foundation. I know from the news that you are doing extraordinary work. It does not surprise me at all. You always had that ability to transform pain into something beautiful and useful. I have also left a letter for my daughter for when she is older. I explain who I am, what I did, and why I decided to give her up for adoption. I talked to her about you too, about the strong and resilient woman Rose is, about the brilliant and compassionate man Robert is. I want her to know she comes from a complicated story, but that does not define who she can become. I do not seek your forgiveness. As I said before, I know I do not deserve it. I only hope that with time, the memory of me softens a little in your memories, that it is not only pain and betrayal, but also some good moments that I know we shared. Live well. Be happy. You have earned every ounce of peace and joy life offers you from now on, with love and sincere regret. Alice. When I finished reading, tears flowed freely down my cheeks. I passed the letter to Robert, who read it in silence. His face, a reflection of mine, moved confused, trying to reconcile this last image of Alice with all the previous ones we kept in our memory. The trip back to Santa Barbara was quiet, each lost in our own thoughts. Alice's death did not erase the damage she had caused us, but it added a layer of human complexity that made it impossible to continue seeing her as a simple villain in our story. She was like all of us, an imperfect person who had made terrible decisions, but who in the end had tried in her own way to make peace with her legacy. 2 years after our arrival in Santa Barbara, the Lucy Rehabilitation Center officially opened its doors. It was a beautiful building, an old cannery converted into a bright and functional space with the latest technologies in physical and oncological rehabilitation, but also with cozy spaces where children could play, read, or simply be children despite their illnesses. The day of the inauguration, the whole city seemed to be present. The mayor cut the ribbon. There were speeches, applause, even tears of emotion. But for me, the most significant moment was when Lucy, now a healthy 9-year-old girl, completely recovered thanks to the experimental treatment we had funded, approached the microphone. "This place is special," she said with surprising confidence for her age, "not only because it will help many children like me get better, but because it was born from love." Uncle Robert and Grandma Rose could have stayed sad after bad things happened to them, but they decided to do something good. And that is the most important thing I have learned. We can always choose to do something good, no matter what happened to us before. Her childish wisdom, so simple and so profound, perfectly summarized the journey we had made from that terrible day in Chicago when I heard Alice pronounce those cruel words about me and my son to this moment of triumph and hope. We had traveled a road of pain, loss, but also of discovery and renewal. After the official ceremony, while the guests enjoyed a cocktail in the center's garden, Robert and I slipped away to the upper terrace. From there we could see the entire coast, the sea extending toward the horizon, the hills silhouetted against the sunset sky. "Do you know what day it is today?" asked Robert. Contemplating the view, I was surprised by the question. Of course I knew it was the inauguration day, a day we had been planning for months. "It is the center's opening day," I replied. Confused. Robert smiled, shaking his head. "Yes, but it is also the anniversary. Today makes exactly 2 years since you heard Alice in the living room in Chicago, the day our lives changed forever." I was left breathless. I had not made the connection. The date had blurred in my memory, converted simply into that day. "It is true," I murmured. I had not realized. "I did," said Robert, taking my hand. "I remembered it this morning when I was getting dressed, and I thought, how perfect. What a perfect way to transform a date that could have been just a reminder of betrayal and pain into a celebration of life and hope." His words moved me deeply. He was right. Of course, without that terrible moment, without that desperate decision to leave everything and start over, we would never have arrived here. We would never have met Margaret and Lucy. We would never have created the foundation. We would never have helped so many children and families. When I came home unannounced that day, I said, squeezing his hand, I could not imagine that would lead us here. "Life is like that," Mom replied Robert with a wisdom that reminded me of Margaret. "We never know where our steps will lead us, especially those we take in moments of crisis. But the important thing is to keep walking, to keep choosing love over fear, hope over resentment." Down in the garden, I could see Lucy running among the guests, her black hair shining under the sun, her laughter reaching us like music. Margaret watched her with pride, chatting animatedly with Helen and other friends who had come to be an important part of our lives. And in that moment, looking at my son, at our new chosen family, at the community we had built, I felt a deep peace. Not a peace based on the absence of problems or challenges, but on the certainty that whatever happened, we had the strength to face it together. "You are right, son," I said finally, "and if I could go back to that terrible day, I would not change anything, because that pain brought us here to this life that with all its scars is fuller and more authentic than the one we left behind." Robert smiled, his eyes shining with contained emotion. So it was worth coming home unannounced. I smiled through the tears that were beginning to form in my eyes. Every minute, son, every tear, every moment of fear, every difficult decision, everything was worth it to get here. And as the sun began to sink into the horizon, dyeing the sky orange and pink, I felt I had finally found my place in the world, not in a luxurious mansion in Chicago, but here in this city by the sea with my son, with our chosen family. With the purpose we had discovered together, life had not been fair to us, but we had been fair to life. We had taken the pain and transformed it into something beautiful, something that would transcend our own lives and continue helping others long after we were no longer here. And that, in the end, was all we could ask for. all that mattered, all that remained when the noise and drama faded. Love, connection, purpose, the ability to look back without regret and forward with hope. I came home unannounced and I heard words that broke my heart. But in that break, I found a strength I did not know I possessed. And in that strength, I found the path to a life I would never have imagined possible. And for that, despite everything, I am grateful.